Keep moving, lady. The officer's hand digs into my arm, fingers like a clamp. My heels skid on the courthouse steps, the marble slick with a thin mist of rain. Flashbulbs pop. Phones rise like a forest of black mirrors. I hear the crowd before I see it, a ripple of voices, someone saying my name, someone else laughing as if it's a street performance. I stumble but straighten, my wrists locked behind me in stainless steel. They've looped the chain too tight. I don't give them the satisfaction of a wince. 30 years of teaching young lawyers how to face down intimidation has taught me how to hold my spine even when my body's screaming. Another officer smirks. Professor, right? Thought you retired. Now you're sneaking into records like some spy. She says she's here on official business, the younger one mutters. Official business? The first officer laughs. Sure, Grandma. We'll let the judge decide. The cameras catch every word. A woman in a red coat whispers, "Isn't she that law professor from the university?" Another murmurs, "She looks crazy." Someone films a TikTok clip with a mocking caption. I keep my eyes forward, ignoring the sting of the cuffs. In my bag, now zipped inside an evidence pouch, sits the real reason I'm here: affidavits, thumb drives, and sealed letters. Without them in my hands, I look exactly like the narrative they're pushing, an old woman gone off script. As we reach the courthouse door, a reporter leans over the rope. Dr. Halloran, why were you trespassing in the clerk's office? I wasn't, I say quietly. And you'll find that out soon enough. He grins, sensing a soundbite. You claim you were framed? I don't answer. The officers tug me inside, metal detectors whining as we pass. The air changes, cooler, heavy with floor polish and stale coffee. The courthouse lobby looms ahead, portraits of judges lining the walls like silent witnesses. I see my reflection in the polished tile, a silver-haired woman in a navy coat, wrists pinched by steel, flanked by two uniformed men. Dignity in chains. The younger officer mutters, delusional. Says she taught constitutional law. The older one snorts. Yeah, sure. Next she'll tell us she wrote the Constitution. They guide me past the security checkpoint and down a corridor toward courtroom 5B. Lawyers in suits glance up from their phones, murmuring to one another. I catch fragments. Is that? I think she's... What's she doing here? I breathe in slowly, smelling old paper and lemon polish. These halls are as familiar to me as my own living room. For decades, I brought students here to watch hearings, to see justice in action. Some of them were brilliant, some forgettable. One, in particular, outshone them all. I almost smile thinking of him, the lanky young man in the back row who always stayed after class to debate ethics. But that was years ago. A female clerk crosses our path and freezes, eyes widening. She whispers to a colleague, "Oh my God, does she know who she's arresting?" The colleague shrugs, glancing at me, then at the officers. I keep walking, cuffed hands aching. My phone, locked in evidence, will already be pinging with texts. Evelyn will see the arrest on the live stream and know what's happening. Whitaker, too. We planned for this possibility. But it's one thing to plan a scenario and another to feel the cold cuff metal digging into your wrists while strangers record your downfall. At the double doors of courtroom 5B, the older officer pushes one open and jerks his head. In you go. The courtroom is crowded, buzzing. It's arraignment day. Local reporters perched at the back like vultures. I hear the scratch of pens, the click of camera shutters. The bailiff announces my name. Head swivel. Somewhere in the gallery someone whispers, "Isn't she the one who taught half the bench?" Another voice says, "No way, she's just some old lady." The temporary judge on the bench glances up, distracted, papers in hand. He doesn't yet realize who stands in front of him. Behind him, a heavy oak door stays closed, the door that leads to chambers. The officers steer me to the defense table. Sit, one orders. I sit, palms pressed to the wood, scanning the room. Every detail slides into my memory. The grain of the paneling, the angle of the cameras, the exact time on the wall clock. This is not humiliation. This is evidence. My eyes flick to the sealed door behind the bench. If the schedule holds, the chief judge will enter any moment to preside over a high-profile motion. He'll take that bench in his black robe, not yet knowing I'm here in chains. He'll look up. He'll recognize me. I inhale and straighten my shoulders. Let them film. Let them tweet. This is the cost of bringing Rod into daylight. A voice from the gallery hisses, "What's she doing here?" Another voice answers, "She's going down." But I know what they don't. I've been here before, just not on this side of the table. And I've never lost a case built on truth. The bailiff calls the next case. My name appears on the docket screen above the bench. The room shifts, murmurs, surprised glances, a few gasps. My title isn't there, only defendant. I close my eyes for a heartbeat and see my old lecture hall, rows of young faces taking notes, one eager voice asking the hard questions. A student who swore he'd reform the system. A student who kept his word. The double oak door clicks. A hush falls over the courtroom. The chief judge is about to enter. The older officer mutters, "Here comes the hammer." I open my eyes and look straight ahead as the bailiff calls, "All rise." Long before the handcuffs, before the cameras and whispers, my life was defined by classrooms and case law. I can still smell the oak-paneled lecture hall of Ellsworth Law School, chalk dust floating in shafts of morning light. Rows of eager faces, some cocky, some terrified, all waiting for me to explain the Constitution not as history, but as a living, breathing contract with power. I taught ethics first, then constitutional law. Not the glamorous courses, but the ones that carved habits of thought into a young lawyer's mind. Each semester, I wrote on the board in block letters, "Power without integrity is predation. Integrity without power is useless." Most students copied it once and forgot. A few got it. One of those few was Daniel Mercer. Tall, angular, quiet. Sat in the back row but stayed after every class. We debated free speech and judicial oversight until the janitor flicked the lights. He once told me, "I don't want to just practice law. I want to shape it." I told him to be careful what he wished for. He clerked for a federal judge, then a circuit court. I lost track for a while, then saw his name on an appellate decision and smiled. When I heard he'd been appointed chief judge of the state's highest court, I wasn't surprised. He'd always had that combination of steel and conscience. But back then, I didn't know he'd become the pivot of my survival. I built my life around teaching, not around money or titles. My home was a modest brick house near campus. I drove a reliable sedan, cooked my own meals, mentored students over tea. Yet behind that simplicity was a mind always cataloging, connecting, remembering. In faculty meetings, I could recall precedents off the top of my head, link statutes across decades, trace power from one boardroom to another. I was never naive about what power does to people. I taught my students that power and temptation are twins. We studied not just famous cases, but also quiet scandals, judges taking bribes, prosecutors hiding evidence, entire careers built on misdirection. Learn the patterns, I'd tell them, so you don't become part of them. When I retired, the dean gave me a plaque. My students gave me handwritten letters. Daniel Mercer sent me a signed photo of his swearing-in as chief judge with a note on the back for Professor Halloran, who taught me to wield power with care. I framed it and put it above my desk. Over the years, I became a kind of quiet legend, the professor who drilled ethics so hard her students carried it like a badge. But a legend doesn't protect you from whispers or false charges. Even in retirement, I stayed alert. I wrote amicus briefs under pseudonyms, advised a few watchdog groups. I kept a private archive of documents, sealed affidavits, whistleblower statements, and data that hinted at a widening judicial bribery scheme. I never stopped thinking like an investigator, which is why, on the day of my arrest, I had my briefcase with me, a slim, worn leather case filled not with groceries or knitting, but with the kind of paperwork that could end careers. Affidavits from clerks, bank routing slips, sealed emails between developers and court staff. Names and dates that lined up too neatly. A USB drive containing a financial map that pointed like a neon arrow toward a conspiracy no one wanted to see. The officers thought they were cuffing a frail retiree. In reality, they were intercepting a courier of truth. Flash to the courthouse steps again. Rain on marble, cameras flashing. The officer yanks the briefcase from my hand. "What's this?" he asks, flipping it open despite the chain around my wrists. Legal documents, I say evenly. Sealed. Not anymore, he mutters, snapping it shut and tucking it under his arm. Evidence now. In that moment, I feel a sharp slice of fear, not for myself, but for the contents. Without that evidence, I'm just an old woman in handcuffs. With it, I'm a threat to the entire scaffolding they've built. The younger officer looks nervous. Shouldn't we log it? We will, the older one says. After she's processed. They don't know that each page is backed up, that Whitaker has digital copies in 3 jurisdictions, that my own clauses trigger if I disappear. But still, seeing that briefcase leave my hands is like seeing someone walk off with your heartbeat. As they lead me through the courthouse lobby, I pass a wall of framed portraits. Judges, justices, chief judges of decades past. I glance up at one empty space waiting for a new portrait. Daniel Mercer's face will hang there soon. My student. My safeguard. If he's still the man I taught, he'll recognize the pattern. He'll see through the lies. But first, I have to survive the spectacle long enough for him to walk through that door. We pass through the metal detectors. My heels click on the floor. The clerk at the desk looks up and freezes, eyes flicking from me to the briefcase. She knows me. She whispers to her colleague, who stiffens. Word will spread. It always does. I lift my chin, wrists aching. The briefcase is gone from my hands, but the truth isn't. And soon, the people who think they've won will realize they've dragged not a helpless retiree, but a retired law professor with a network, a memory, and a plan. The handcuffs click open at the defense table, but the damage is done. The red marks on my wrists glow under the fluorescent lights, a silent badge of humiliation. The bailiff steps back, his expression blank. Across the courtroom, the temporary judge peers over his reading glasses, the kind of man who treats arraignments like a conveyor belt. State versus Halloran, the clerk announces. Charges: impersonating legal staff, unlawful access to restricted records, intent to obstruct a judicial proceeding. I hear the words as if spoken through water. Impersonating legal staff? I still carry my bar card. Unlawful access? The documents were sealed under my own authorizations. Obstructing a proceeding? I was trying to expose a crime. It's a script from another world. The prosecutor rises. He's young, sharply dressed, and too eager. Your Honor, the defendant was found inside the clerk's records room attempting to remove sensitive files. When confronted, she claimed to be on official business. Security footage shows her rifling through cabinets. That's a lie, I say, voice calm but clear. I was returning files to the clerk's office, not removing them. And the footage is edited. The judge glares at me. You will address this court through counsel. I have no counsel present, I reply, because I was arrested without cause. He bangs his gavel. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. I close my mouth, but keep my eyes locked on the prosecutor. He won't meet them. Additionally, the prosecutor continues, we have reason to believe the defendant attempted to misrepresent herself as court staff to gain access to a secure server. She was in possession of a briefcase containing sealed material she could not lawfully hold. Your Honor, I begin again. I was the one who sealed that material. Silence. The judge snaps. I let the quiet settle. Years of teaching have taught me that sometimes silence says more than any speech. Around the gallery, phones buzz as people Google my name. A ripple of recognition passes through the benches, lawyers whispering to one another, nudging colleagues. I see one clerk mouth Professor Halloran to another, who glances up sharply at me. The prosecutor notices the shift and doubles down. We will be introducing security footage shortly as Exhibit A. I raise one eyebrow, just enough for him to see. He flips a page nervously. On the back row, a junior attorney holds up his phone, showing an old yearbook photo of me lecturing in a classroom. Another whispers, she taught Daniel Mercer. The name travels like a spark. People glance at the closed door behind the bench, the one leading to chambers. Everyone knows who's scheduled to preside over a later case this morning. The chief judge. My student. The temporary judge senses the current. Counsel, proceed with caution, he mutters. The prosecutor swallows and nods. Yes, Your Honor. Then, forcing bravado, he says, We also have a sealed indictment naming the defendant in a broader conspiracy investigation. With the court's permission, I'll read it into the record. For the first time, my composure slips a fraction. A sealed indictment? I repeat, voice low. Evelyn had warned me something like this might happen, a trumped-up charge to keep me off the field. But sealed indictments don't just appear overnight. Someone has been moving pieces behind the curtain. The judge nods. Proceed. The prosecutor lifts a heavy envelope from his case, breaks the seal, and unfolds several pages. His hands tremble slightly. The gallery leans forward. Even the bailiff shifts, sensing a change in the air. Count 1, he reads. Conspiracy to interfere with judicial process. My pulse slows. They're not accusing me of a single incident. They're trying to wrap me into a conspiracy, flip the script entirely, turn me from whistleblower into mastermind. Count 2. The prosecutor continues, abuse of access privileges. Phones buzz again. People take photos of the prosecutor reading, texting colleagues, forwarding live updates. The junior attorney with the yearbook photo now has my LinkedIn profile up, scrolling rapidly. I catch a glimpse of my own reflection in a brass plaque on the wall. Silver hair, steady gaze. In my mind, I'm back in the lecture hall, writing the day's topic on the board, due process and abuse of power. This is the case study I never planned to teach. The prosecutor flips to the last page, clears his throat. Count 3, a door clicks at the back of the courtroom. All heads swivel. A clerk slips in and whispers to the bailiff, who stiffens. The closed oak door behind the bench stays shut, but the energy shifts like a storm building. Count 3. The prosecutor repeats, louder, fraudulent acquisition of state property in concert with unknown co-conspirators. My heart stops for a fraction of a second. Fraudulent acquisition of state property. They're accusing me of the very thing I was about to reveal about others. A mirror charge designed to neutralize my evidence. The judge looks bored. Noted. Set bail at, but before he can finish, the gallery erupts in whispers. Someone has just sent a group text showing a photo of me standing beside Daniel Mercer at his swearing-in ceremony years ago. Another tweet goes live. Arrested law professor taught Chief Judge Mercer. What's going on? The prosecutor hesitates, hearing the murmurs, but plows ahead, reading the indictment's final line, and therefore requests remand into custody pending trial. I lean forward slowly. Your Honor, I say, voice measured, this indictment is not what it seems. And if you continue this charade, you will regret it. The judge bangs his gavel again. Enough. But the damage is done. The room now knows two things. I'm not who they thought I was, and someone powerful is afraid of what I'm carrying. I glance at the sealed oak door one more time. Daniel Mercer is on the schedule. He'll walk through that door any minute. And when he does, this courtroom will tilt on its axis. The image of the sealed indictment still echoed in my head as the courtroom noises dissolved into memory. I drifted back to the moment that had brought me here, months before, in a quiet corner of my home office, when I'd first stumbled onto the pattern. It began as a series of phone calls from former clerks. Anonymous emails. Hints about a developer named Kessler funneling money to court staff to fast-track his cases. I brushed them off at first. Rumors always circle big contracts. But then I found a bank slip misfiled under an unrelated case, a routing number leading to an offshore account, a name I recognized from the courthouse cafeteria. Small threads in different colors that, once woven together, formed a noose. For weeks, I stayed up late at my kitchen table, laptop glowing in the dark. My tea went cold while I cross-referenced filings. I built a spreadsheet mapping judges, clerks, and outside consultants. One column kept flashing like a warning beacon. Daniel Mercer, Chief Judge. Not his name directly, never that sloppy, but his signature on fast-tracked approvals, rulings that landed perfectly in Kessler's favor, staff he'd hired personally. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I realized it was leverage. If Mercer's court was compromised, his entire career could collapse. I had taught Daniel better than that. Or so I believed. I began assembling a case, not to destroy him, but to protect him, to show him the rot beneath his feet before it swallowed him. I reached out through old networks, pulling sealed affidavits from whistleblowers, requesting confidential files under my still valid bar credentials. Each time I logged in, I imagined a silent alarm tripping somewhere in the courthouse basement. In my briefcase the day of my arrest were 3 things: a binder of affidavits naming clerks and outside contractors, a thumb drive with encrypted bank transfers linking Kessler to a court modernization fund, a sealed letter addressed to Daniel Mercer himself, explaining everything I'd found. I had rehearsed the meeting in my mind. Walk into the courthouse, hand the letter to his clerk, request a private audience. He'd recognize me, remember my lectures, thank me for protecting him. We'd strategize together, cut out the corruption without shattering the court. But power never lets itself be confronted quietly. Someone inside tipped them off. Instead of a discreet handoff, I got handcuffs and a public spectacle. They wanted to brand me unstable before I could open my mouth. The emotional weight of that betrayal pressed on me. For decades, I had nurtured young lawyers, telling them to stand up when it counted. I'd kept my distance from Daniel's career so he could rise on his own merits. And now, at the moment of truth, my presence was being weaponized against him. Flashback, a lecture hall years ago, Daniel raising his hand. "Professor, how do you expose a corrupt judge without burning down the court?" My answer back then, with impeccable evidence and impeccable timing. Now the question echoed like a taunt. Evidence I had. Timing I did not. Back in the present, sitting at the defense table, I glanced at the bailiff holding my briefcase near the bench. I could almost feel the weight of the thumb drive inside. Without it in my hands, my leverage shrank to almost nothing. But somewhere beyond those walls, Whitaker still had backups. Evelyn still had contacts. This wasn't over. As the prosecutor droned on about access without authorization, my phone buzzed in my mind, the phantom of a device locked away. I remembered the text alert I'd seen seconds before they cuffed me, just a flash across my screen as the officers approached in the clerk's office. "We know what you're carrying. Stop, or you won't leave court alive." I hadn't recognized the number. It disappeared from the thread as soon as it arrived, like a match struck in darkness. But the threat was clear. This wasn't just about reputation or even prison. Someone was willing to kill me to keep those documents sealed. In that moment, hunched over my kitchen table weeks before, I'd hesitated. Do I risk everything to bring this to Daniel? Do I risk tarnishing the only student I'd ever truly believed in? But the longer I waited, the more the accounts drained, the more clerks disappeared or resigned, the more cases settled off the record. So I chose the only path left, go to the courthouse myself, with evidence in hand, and trust the man he had become. And now here I sat, wrists red, indictment echoing, the sealed oak door still shut. My plan had flipped, my cover story shredded. Instead of a mentor arriving with a lifeline, I was a defendant in a kangaroo hearing, stripped of my tools. But even stripped of tools, I still had memory. And I had one more weapon no one could seize, the truth of who I was and what I knew about them. I pictured Daniel behind that door, adjusting his robe, scanning his docket. Did he know I was here? Had he already been warned off? Was he complicit or captive? The thoughts sliced like ice. Another flashback, late night in my study, composing the sealed letter to him. "Daniel, you taught yourself to wield power with care. Please do not let them use you. The evidence enclosed may save you as much as it saves the court." Back in the courtroom, the temporary judge called for a recess. The prosecutor leaned in to whisper to the bailiff. Phones vibrated like a hive of bees. My eyes went to the briefcase again. Locked. Untouched. For now. Somewhere deep in my mind the warning text replayed, "Stop, or you won't leave court alive." I squared my shoulders, exhaled slowly. My whole career had been about teaching others to confront fear without blinking. This was my final exam. If Daniel Mercer opened that door and looked at me, he'd see the teacher who had once taught him about integrity. Whether he still recognized her or whether he'd chosen the other side would decide both our fates. The courtroom swelled with a different kind of noise now, a steady hum of phones buzzing, cameras clicking, the low hiss of people whispering my name like a rumor. The prosecutor's voice cut through it, smoother now, buoyed by the doctored footage projected on a screen beside the bench. "Your Honor," he said with mock gravity, "this footage shows the defendant aggressively entering a restricted area of the clerk's office, rifling through confidential files. On the screen, I watched a ghost version of myself, same coat, same hair, but the angle cropped to look furtive, the timestamps conveniently missing. In reality, I had been placing sealed documents on the desk. In the video, it looked like I was stuffing papers into my bag. The sound was muted, making my calm explanation look like angry shouting. I kept my face impassive. My hands trembled only slightly under the table, but in my lap my phone, recovered during the recess, was already recording a fresh voice memo, quietly capturing every discrepancy between their claims and the real docket times. My lawyer wasn't here yet, but my evidence would be." The prosecutor clicked to the next clip, 2 uniformed officers escorting me down a hallway. In the real event, they'd grabbed my arm without warning. In the video, it looked like I had tried to push past them. The commentary in the gallery rippled louder. "She looks unhinged. Didn't she teach at the university? Why would she steal court documents?" The temporary judge adjusted his glasses. "Disturbing footage," he said. "This supports the charges." I raised my eyes and said quietly, "That footage has been altered." "Miss Halloran," the judge warned. One more outburst, I closed my mouth but kept my eyes locked on the screen. In my mind, I was back in my lecture hall teaching about manipulated evidence and chain of custody. This was the nightmare case study, the kind of thing we told students to watch for, but rarely did they see it happen live. Across the gallery, phones began tweeting. "Former professor caught stealing court docs." "Ex-law prof goes rogue." Screenshots of the doctored footage circulated in real time. "My reputation, 30 years of teaching ethics, eroding by the minute in an algorithmic smear." But smear campaigns are predictable. They overreach. They contradict themselves. And every contradiction leaves a footprint. I opened my phone under the table, fingers steady now. Each time the prosecutor cited a timestamp, I jotted the real time from the clerk's log I still had cached in my email. Each time the video jumped, I noted the missing seconds. In a few hours, Whitaker could cross-check the entire playback and expose the edits. The prosecutor's tone grew more dramatic. "This defendant is not a harmless retiree," he intoned. "She is a sophisticated actor who has been using her old credentials to infiltrate secure court systems. We believe she may be linked to an ongoing leak of sealed cases." A gasp moved through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Spy." Another said, "Traitor." I kept my face calm, breathing slow and even. Inside, a small fire built. They were spinning a net, but in their eagerness, they were tying knots around their own wrists. Then came the witnesses. One officer testified I had lunged at him. Another said I screamed threats. Each version contradicted the last. My phone caught it all, timestamped and geotagged. By the time Evelyn arrived, we'd have a transcript of their perjury before they even left the stand. The prosecutor finished his theatrics with a flourish. "Given the seriousness of these acts, we recommend remand without bail." The temporary judge nodded, leaning toward the clerk. "Noted. We'll decide shortly." At that moment, the heavy oak door behind the bench cracked open. A clerk slipped inside, whispered to someone unseen, and vanished again. The door shut quietly. But in that instant, a hush fell over the courtroom. Word was traveling. 2 rows behind me, a junior attorney hissed to her neighbor, "That's Professor Halloran." The neighbor raised his phone, scrolling through old class photos, then glanced at the door. "Chief Judge Mercer is scheduled at 10:30, he murmured. In the bench's shadow, another clerk leaned toward the bailiff, whispering urgently. The bailiff's eyes widened. Across the gallery, my phone buzzed once with a message from Whitaker. "Stay calm. We're watching the live stream. Hold position." I straightened my shoulders. The smear was peaking, the narrative flooding social media. Ex-professor goes rogue. But the counter-narrative had begun. Former professor who taught chief judge arrested. It was only a matter of time before those 2 currents collided in front of everyone. The prosecutor shuffled his papers, sensing the shift but not understanding it yet. "Your Honor, as you can see," he began again, but his voice faltered as a clerk stepped up to the bench and whispered directly into the judge's ear. The judge's eyebrows shot up. He glanced at me, then at the sealed door. The clerk's words carried just enough to reach the first row of the gallery. The defendant, taught you in law school. The room stilled. Phones froze mid-scroll. Reporters leaned forward. The prosecutor blinked, finally catching the implication. I sat back slowly, cuffs now gone but imprinting my skin, and let a small smile play at the edge of my mouth. Recognition had entered the building. The next move would be theirs. Years before the handcuffs, before the doctored footage and the whispers, I was building something far larger than a classroom could hold. I loved teaching, but teaching was only ever one side of my life. The other side, the part no plaque or retirement party ever saw, was the slow, deliberate accumulation of influence, not for vanity, but as a kind of insurance policy. I started quietly in the late 1990s when a state senator asked me to consult on judicial ethics reform. One draft memo turned into a white paper, one white paper turned into a think tank. Within a decade, I was advising lawmakers on constitutional oversight and writing language that would become model statutes. People assumed Professor Halloran meant lectures and student papers. In reality, it meant policy rooms and closed-door hearings where billion-dollar budgets were negotiated line by line. I never sought credit. I learned early that visible power draws fire. Instead, I became the quiet architect. When a city wanted to overhaul its public defender system, they called me. When a governor wanted to craft a judicial accountability bill, I drafted the first outlines. Behind the scenes, lobbyists tried to soften me with dinners and gifts. I smiled, declined, and wrote tighter ethics clauses. My name almost never appeared in the press, but my language did in laws passed, in decisions cited, in guardrails built. Along the way, I noticed something darker. The same networks of influence I'd helped shape could also be abused. Developers, fixers, and mid-level court officers learned how to warp the system. They didn't always bribe judges directly. They bribed the infrastructure around them, clerks, consultants, IT staff. They learned to bury paper trails under legal jargon and pilot programs. Watching it unfold was like seeing mold creep across a ceiling you once painted yourself. So, as I built influence, I also built a counterweight, a network of investigators and watchdogs who owed loyalty not to politics, but to principle. Former students who'd gone into auditing, young attorneys who believed in reform, a handful of retired marshals who'd seen enough corruption to last a lifetime. Over the years, we called ourselves the Ledger, not an organization, just a loose ledger of names who tracked who owed what to whom. The ledger gathered whispers and receipts, quietly verifying them, threading them into patterns. They knew the same officers who arrested me long before those men knew my name. They tracked how bank accounts linked to shell corporations linked to modernization funds. They watched overtime logs, training rosters, and travel vouchers. Every time a suspicious contract appeared, one of my people flagged it. When the bribery pattern began to touch Daniel Mercer's court, I activated the ledger's deepest contacts. Not to destroy him, but to shield him. He'd been my brightest student, the one who stayed after class debating how to reform systems. I could not stand by and watch the system rot under his feet. So I did what I always did, built a case, quietly and meticulously, in the background. Flashback to my home office a year ago, maps pinned to corkboards, arrows linking names. Phone calls whispered at night to marshals in 2 states. USB drives mailed to me under blank labels. I became a ghost in my own house, coffee going cold while I scrolled through filings. My friends thought I was bored in retirement. My enemies thought I was asleep. Neither saw the fortress forming in silence. But protecting others takes its toll. For years I had blocked attacks on my former students, tipped off journalists to minor scandals before they metastasized, shielded them from smear campaigns. Yet here I was, shackled by the very system I had tried to defend. The officers who arrested me were pawns in a game I'd mapped years ago. Seeing their names on the arrest sheet was like reading my own handwriting backwards. That betrayal cut deeper than the cuffs. I had believed that if you built enough guardrails, power would stay in its lane. But power always finds the shoulder, always tests the fence. Back in the present, I sat at the defense table, the prosecutor spinning lies, the doctored footage looping on the screen. My phone buzzed once, tucked under a stack of papers, unseen by anyone else. A coded signal from the ledger. We'd rehearsed it. One buzz meant delivery made. I glanced up casually and caught sight of a movement near the bench. A clerk, not one of the usuals, approached the bailiff carrying a slim USB stick sealed in a clear evidence pouch. The bailiff frowned, whispered something, then slipped through the oak door into chambers. I knew what that USB stick contained. Weeks of parallel investigation by the ledger. Financial logs, time-stamped body cam backups, and most importantly a cross-checked chain of custody for every file I'd tried to hand off that morning. A digital spine to the case I'd been building, and a digital sword to cut through the lies. As the bailiff disappeared, I forced myself to look bored, even weary. My hands folded loosely on the table, my gaze drifting as if drowsy. But inside I felt the first true spark of hope since the arrest. The ledger had delivered the package directly to the chief judge's clerk during recess, just as planned. In the gallery, the prosecutor kept hammering at the doctored footage, oblivious. Reporters live-tweeted about ex-professor meltdown without knowing the USB stick was sliding under the door toward the highest authority in the state. My wrists still ached from the cuffs, but the fortress was not yet breached. Pieces were moving, invisible to the crowd but visible to me. Somewhere behind that oak door, Daniel Mercer would be holding that USB stick right now, scanning the index, realizing who had sent it and what it contained. Realizing also that his old professor was the defendant sitting in chains, accused of crimes she'd tried to stop. The collision course was set. And when he emerged, he would either distance himself or stand beside me. Either way, the truth would land on his desk like a hammer. I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusting my jacket to hide my phone. It buzzed again, 2 short pulses this time. Another code from the ledger. Opening file now. Good, I thought. Let them open it. Let the courtroom see power for what it really is. Not the gavel or the badge, but the network of memory and evidence beneath the surface. I exhaled slowly, eyes on the oak door, and waited for the next act of the play to begin. The oak door creaked open, and the air in courtroom 5B shifted like a current changing direction. Everyone rose automatically. Even the prosecutor's voice caught mid-sentence. Out of the side corridor, framed by the heavy door, stepped Daniel Mercer, black robe immaculate, hair silvered at the temples, eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. He shouldn't have been here. This was supposed to be a routine arraignment. But there he was, my former student, now chief judge of the state, walking directly toward the bench where the temporary judge sat blinking in surprise. "Your Honor," Mercer said, nodding curtly, "I'll take over this matter." The temporary judge fumbled, then stood. Chief judge, of course. He slid his papers aside, vacated the chair, and stepped down. Mercer climbed the steps, robes flowing, and took the seat behind the bench. He didn't look at me yet. He opened a folder handed to him by the clerk, the USB stick sealed in evidence. The room fell to a hush so deep I could hear the air conditioning hum. Phones froze mid-scroll. The prosecutor tried to speak, but Mercer raised a single finger and the man fell silent. "Bring the defendant forward," Mercer said. The bailiff gestured me toward the podium. My legs felt heavy but steady. I walked past the defense table, past the rows of lawyers and onlookers, until I stood directly below him, the student I had taught 2 decades ago. He looked down at me, eyes narrowing, scanning my face. Recognition flickered and then deepened. His lips parted. "Professor?" His voice, the same cadence from years ago, a mixture of disbelief and familiarity. I inclined my head once. "Chief Judge." A murmur swept the gallery. Someone whispered, "She taught him." Another, "This is unbelievable." A reporter's phone camera zoomed in. Tweets exploded. Mercer cleared his throat, recovering his composure. "We're going to pause this proceeding," he said evenly. "I need to review new evidence submitted to the court." He held up the USB stick. "And I need to hear directly from the defendant." The prosecutor sputtered. "Your Honor, the state, sit down," Mercer said, eyes like flint. The prosecutor sat. I stepped to the microphone, wrists no longer cuffed, but still marked red. Your Honor, I said quietly but clearly, this entire proceeding is built on falsified footage and fabricated charges designed to neutralize me before I could deliver evidence to you. He raised an eyebrow. Evidence of what? Of systemic bribery within this courthouse, I said. Including the officers who arrested me, the developers funding them, and the intermediaries using shell LLCs to launder the money. Gasps from the gallery. Phones lifted again. I have sealed affidavits from clerks and IT staff, I continued. Body cam backups cross-checked with time logs. Financial emails linking Kessler Development to covert payments disguised as modernization grants. It's all on that drive. I glanced at the briefcase still held by the bailiff. And more in my case. Mercer opened the evidence pouch, slid the USB stick into a secure laptop handed to him by the clerk. He scanned the index, his face tightening as the screen filled with names, dates, and bank routing numbers. Where did this come from? He asked. My investigators, I said. People you once mentored. People who still believe in the law. His eyes flicked up at me. And why bring it directly to me instead of federal authorities? Because it's your court, I said softly. And because you asked me once how to expose a corrupt judge without burning down the institution. For a heartbeat, we were back in the lecture hall, chalk dust in the sunlight. He exhaled slowly, then turned to the clerk. Bring me the briefcase. The bailiff handed it up. Mercer opened it, flipping through the binder of affidavits, emails, and hard copies of the same files. His jaw tightened. He turned to the officers who had arrested me. Step forward. They hesitated. Now, they obeyed, faces pale. According to this evidence, Mercer said, you falsified an arrest report, doctored security footage, and acted under instructions from outside this court. Do you have anything to say? They glanced at each other, mute. Mercer nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then reached for his gavel. Proceedings suspended. The prosecutor leapt to his feet. Your Honor, you can't just sit, Mercer said again. His voice was steel now, the same steel I remembered from debates in my classroom. He picked up a phone built into the bench and spoke a single sentence to someone unseen. Within moments, the rear doors opened and a line of dark-suited agents from the Department of Justice filed in, badges displayed. The room gasped. Ladies and gentlemen, Mercer said, this court is now in emergency suspension pending federal review. All personnel remain where they are. The agents fanned out, collecting the officers' phones, ordering the prosecutor to hand over his laptop. One agent approached me, asked quietly if I needed medical attention. I shook my head. Across the gallery, reporters scrambled to tweet, DOJ agents storm courtroom after chief judge recognizes former professor. The smear campaign was unraveling live on 1,000 screens. Mercer looked back down at me. For a moment, the mask of the chief judge slipped, and I saw the student again, earnest and terrified. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He whispered. I tried, I said. They intercepted me. He nodded once, eyes hardening. We'll sort this out. Then, louder. All evidence pertaining to this case is now under federal custody. This proceeding is adjourned. The agents moved briskly, seizing the projectors, the doctored footage, even the court's hard drives. The prosecutor sat pale and sweating. The officers stared at the floor. Someone in the gallery murmured a prayer. I stood there, wrists aching but head high, feeling the pivot in the room. 10 minutes earlier, I had been a disgraced retiree in handcuffs. Now the chief judge had recognized me, my evidence was in the right hands, and the DOJ was walking through the doors. But I also knew this was only the end of Act 1. The machine I'd poked was large and vicious. The agents would find things even I hadn't uncovered. There would be retaliation. And Daniel Mercer would have to decide how much of himself he was willing to risk to clean up his own court. Still, as the agents led the officers out and sealed off the courtroom, a slow breath escaped me. This was the pivot I'd been aiming for, the courtroom flip, the moment of recognition. After years of quiet gathering, the truth was finally standing under the lights. Mercer tapped his gavel one final time. Professor Halloran, please remain. Everyone else, clear the room. His voice was measured, but the room obeyed instantly. I stood at the podium as the gallery emptied, the hum of whispers receding like a tide. For the first time that morning, my hands stopped trembling. The courtroom was half emptied now, the public pushed back behind security lines, but the energy inside still cracked like a live wire. The DOJ agents moved with clinical precision, their black gloves snapping as they collected devices, flash drives, and paper files. One agent knelt to unplug the court's projector while another secured the evidence cart. The prosecutor tried to shield his laptop, but two agents blocked him, producing a warrant embossed with a federal seal. "This is a live investigation," one agent said. "All electronics are subject to seizure." The prosecutor's face went chalk white. "You have no, we do." The agent cut him off, sliding the warrant across the table. "Signed this morning." I stood at the defense podium, arms crossed, as the fortress I had built finally rose to the surface. Years of whispers, spreadsheets, and sealed affidavits were now uncoiling in real time, crawling across the agents' encrypted laptops like a living map. The smirk on the prosecutor's face had curdled into something sour. Across the room, Daniel Mercer, Chief Judge Mercer now, sat behind the bench, one hand on his chin, scanning the USB index on a secured screen. Names scrolled down, developers, clerks, middlemen, even two sitting judges. Lines of transactions leapt across state borders, flagged by routing numbers and shell LLCs. It wasn't just bribery. It was an industrial-scale evidence suppression ring, washing millions through consulting fees and modernization funds. "Jesus," an agent muttered softly. "This is bigger than we thought." Phones vibrated in the gallery, but were quickly confiscated. Reporters tried to memorize what they were seeing, eyes wide. The prosecutor shifted, trying to inch toward the exit, but an agent blocked him. Mercer looked up at me, his face pale but composed. "Professor," he said quietly enough that only I could hear, "how long have you been tracking this?" "Years," I said. "Long enough to know it reached your court." His eyes flickered pain, maybe anger. I suspected, he admitted under his breath. But I had no proof. Only rumors. "That's why I came," I said. "I couldn't let them use you." We locked eyes for a moment across the bench, teacher and student reunited under the harsh light of a scandal neither of us had fully anticipated. In that moment, I saw the younger man he'd been, earnest and idealistic, and I wondered if this exposure would destroy him or free him. An agent called out from the evidence table. "We've got direct payments from Kessler Development to 3 different clerk accounts. And look at this, routing through Delaware then offshore. Classic laundering." Another agent added, "Bodycam backups confirm arrest team received texts from an outside number just before detaining the professor. Orders to neutralize her before delivery." The room rippled with shock. Even the bailiff leaned against the wall, face gray. The prosecutor finally broke. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "You're violating, sit down," an agent barked. "You're named in this evidence." The gallery gasped. 2 agents flanked the prosecutor, seizing his phone and placing it in an evidence bag. One whispered something in his ear that drained the last color from his face. Mercer tapped the screen with a trembling finger. "These time stamps," he murmured. "They match my docket entries exactly. They've been gaming my own court. They were using your reputation as cover," I said quietly. "They knew no one would question you." He shut his eyes for a moment, then opened them, steel returning. "Not anymore." Just then a commotion broke near the door. 2 of the arresting officers, the ones who had mocked me on the courthouse steps, tried to slip out of the gallery side door. Agents intercepted them, but one blurted out, "There's another operation." The agent tightened his grip. "Speak clearly." The officer's eyes darted to Mercer. "You don't understand. They're coming after him next." "Who's coming?" Mercer demanded. The officer clamped his mouth shut, realizing he'd said too much. The agent twisted his arm gently but firmly. "You're going to tell us everything." The officer glanced at me, then at Mercer, and whispered hoarsely, "It's bigger than this courtroom." We were just the first wave. The agents exchanged looks. One spoke into a lapel mic, murmuring code words. Another locked the courtroom doors from the inside. Mercer leaned forward. "Professor, do you know what he's talking about?" I shook my head. "Only that they didn't expect you to see this evidence." He exhaled, scanning the scrolling names again. Then we've only just opened the door. The DOJ lead agent closed the laptop and looked up. Judge Mercer, we need to move you and the witness to a secure location immediately. Witness, Mercer echoed. The agent nodded. Until we know how deep this goes, you're both targets. Across the room, the prosecutor slumped into his chair, defeated. The officers who had arrested me now stood cuffed themselves, staring at the floor. The gallery buzzed with reporters whispering about another operation. Outside, through the tall courthouse windows, blue lights flashed as more vehicles arrived. I straightened, feeling the gravity shift again. Hours ago, I'd been a defendant in handcuffs. Now the DOJ was calling me a witness. The fortress of evidence I'd carried in my briefcase was now their roadmap to dismantling a multi-state bribery ring. But the officer's warning echoed in my head. They're coming after him next. For a heartbeat, I saw Daniel Mercer not as a chief judge, but as a young student asking me how to expose corruption without destroying yourself. The answer had always been the same, with impeccable evidence and impeccable timing. But timing cuts both ways, and now our timing had exposed him as much as it had protected him. I leaned toward the microphone. Your Honor, I said softly, we're not safe here. He met my gaze, the steel in his eyes mixed with something else, resolve. Then let's finish this quickly, he said. The lead agent barked orders to his team, sealing the courtroom. Reporters tried to film but were pushed back. Someone pulled the fire alarm in the hallway. A klaxon began to wail. Red lights strobed across the paneled walls, throwing everything into a surreal flicker. Mercer stood, robe swirling, and addressed the room. This hearing is over. Everyone remain where you are until federal marshals escort you out. The agent nearest him touched his shoulder. We've got you, Judge. But the words another operation still hung in the air like a blade. I knew enough to understand we'd only sliced the surface of something deeper, a network willing to frame, threaten, and kill to keep its grip. As the agents closed ranks around Mercer and me, I felt the shift from courtroom drama to survival scenario. We'd triggered the reversal, exposed the conspiracy. Now the real fight would begin. The klaxon finally silenced. Agents lined the walls, forming a cordon around the bench and the defense podium. The gallery was cleared down to a handful of reporters and court staff, all of them pale with the sense they were witnessing something historic. Even the marble pillars seemed to lean closer. Daniel Mercer stood behind the bench without his robe now, sleeves rolled back, eyes no longer uncertain. The USB drive lay next to a stack of affidavits, a bright red evidence tag clipped to it like a warning flare. For the first time since the door opened, I saw my former student not as a boy from the back row, but as a man inhabiting the full weight of his office. He rapped the gavel once. This court will come to order. His voice carried a new edge, a resonance that made even the agents pause. Professor Halloran, he said publicly, you are hereby exonerated of all charges presented in this arraignment. The evidence supplied to this court establishes a coordinated attempt to frame you, subvert due process, and obstruct justice. Gasps from the remaining staff. Reporters scribbled furiously. 2 agents exchanged a look but said nothing. He turned toward the officers who had arrested me, now cuffed at a table like schoolchildren. You have been remanded into federal custody pending further investigation. You will remain seated and silent. Then he pivoted back to me. Professor, if you have anything you wish to place on the record, now is the time. I stepped forward, feeling the years of teaching gather in my lungs like a tide. The microphone was cool under my fingers. For decades, I've taught young lawyers that power without integrity is predation, and integrity without power is useless. My own mantra, now echoing against the paneled walls. I came here today not as a thief or a saboteur, but as a teacher still trying to teach. The evidence you've seen is not an isolated scandal. It's a network that exploits loopholes, intimidates whistleblowers, and corrupts the very foundation of justice. It thrives on secrecy. Today, that secrecy is gone. I turned slightly to include the remaining court staff and agents. When you teach ethics, you teach more than rules. You teach courage. Courage to stand against your own colleagues, your own incentives, even your own past. That courage is what I hope to see in my students. And today, in this courtroom, I've seen it. My eyes found Mercer's. Chief Judge Mercer was once my student. He asked me how to expose corruption without burning down the institution. Today, he's answered his own question. A ripple passed through the room, a mix of admiration and unease. Mercer straightened, jaw set, but a flicker of gratitude crossed his face. I continued, softer now. I did not want to implicate my student. I wanted to protect him. But power attracts predators and silence protects them. So I chose not to be silent. I stepped back from the microphone. The agents shifted, absorbing the moment. A reporter mouthed "wow" into her phone. For the first time all morning, the air felt breathable. Mercer nodded slowly. Let the record reflect that Professor Halloran's statement will be entered into the proceedings, he said, voice steady but charged. And let it also reflect that this court will not tolerate corruption in any form. He turned to the lead DOJ agent. You have everything you need? The agent nodded. We do. But there's one more item. He gestured to the evidence cart. The sealed briefcase. My pulse ticked up. The sealed briefcase. Not the leather one they'd taken from me, but a second case delivered by the agents from an off-site location. Inside were documents I'd held back, the ones that went above and beyond Daniel's court, names that had never been spoken aloud in this building. Mercer glanced at me. Professor, should we open it? I hesitated, feeling the weight of years settle on my shoulders. It implicates people beyond this courthouse, I said quietly. If you open it here, there's no going back. His eyes searched mine. We're past going back. He nodded to the agent. Open it. The agent spun the combination lock and lifted the lid. Inside, in neat folders, were the final pieces, financials and communications tying state legislators, lobbyists, and a sitting senator to the bribery ring. Photos, travel itineraries, offshore routing slips. A map that reached far beyond the state, far beyond anything Daniel Mercer had ever ruled on. The agent's eyebrows rose. Sir, this goes all the way to he cut himself off, glancing at the reporters still scribbling. He closed the case halfway. You'll want to see this privately. But it was too late. A photographer at the back had already zoomed in and snapped a shot of a recognizable name on one of the folders. On social media, the image would be live in seconds. Mercer's face tightened. He closed the briefcase with a snap and looked at me. You've been holding this for a long time, he said under his breath. I was waiting for the right moment, I whispered back. This is it, he said grimly. The agent moved to escort the briefcase to a secure location, but Mercer raised a hand. No, we keep it here until we finish. His voice was iron now, echoing off the walls. The gallery fell silent. Everyone in the room sensed the shift. The scandal had metastasized into something national. The whispers had turned into a storm. Outside, sirens wailed, more agents arriving. Inside, the chief judge and his former professor stood shoulder to shoulder, a living tableau of power and reckoning. And still, under the heavy silence, I felt the tremor of something bigger. The briefcase was open. The names were visible. There would be retaliation. Mercer leaned slightly toward me. We're in this together now, he said. I met his gaze. We always were. The lead agent motioned to his team. Secure everything. This courtroom is now a federal scene. Reporters tried to push closer, but were held back. Phones vibrated with headlines. Chief Judge recognizes former professor. Open sealed briefcase implicating higher officials. For a flicker of a moment, I allowed myself to feel the smallest pulse of triumph. Not vindictive, not gloating, just the satisfaction of truth surfacing after years underground. But it lasted only a heartbeat. The hard part was still to come. Because once you open the top layer of a conspiracy, the deeper layers start to move. The courtroom had become a command center. DOJ agents moved in coordinated waves, handcuffing the very officers who'd once dragged me up the courthouse steps. The prosecutor who had read out the fabricated indictment now sat pale and trembling, his wrists bound with the same stainless steel cuffs he'd ordered for me. Reporters scribbled, cameras rolled, and the air trembled with the sound of reputations collapsing. An agent read out charges like a roll call of betrayal, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, conspiracy to defraud the state. The officers were marched out first, their badges stripped. The prosecutor followed, escorted between two marshals, his protests muffled by the low murmur of phones streaming the scene to the outside world. A lifetime of quiet impunity had ended in under an hour. Chief Judge Daniel Mercer remained at the bench, robe back on, posture unshakable. He didn't rush. He watched every arrest, every piece of evidence bagged, every digital file duplicated to federal servers. This was no longer a local scandal. It was a purge. Finally, he spoke. "Let the record reflect," he said, voice steady but resonant, "that this court recognizes the wrongful arrest of Professor Eleanor Halloran and the falsification of evidence against her. Let the record also reflect the initiation of federal proceedings against the parties named in this evidence." A murmur passed through the room. The agents paused, letting his words settle. Mercer stood, came down from the bench, and faced me at eye level. Cameras caught the moment. "Professor Halloran," he said formally but with unmistakable warmth, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my thanks, and so does the justice system of this state. You taught me that integrity is the only shield worth holding. You've lived it. And today, you've saved us all from a deeper rot." The words were simple, but they landed like a benediction. Around us, the last of the arrested were being led out. Reporters captured the handshake that followed student and teacher, judge and whistleblower, a reversal of the morning's humiliation. Mercer turned back to the cameras. "I will be convening an emergency judicial review panel and a special prosecutor to examine all cases affected by this scheme. Reforms will begin immediately." He paused, then added with quiet weight, "and I will not recuse myself from scrutiny. No one is above the law, including me." The gallery erupted in quiet applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Agents exchanged glances, but said nothing. The narrative that had dominated the morning, Professor Gone Rogue, was now inverted. Across the state, headlines would be rewriting themselves. Professor exposes bribery ring. Chief Judge's mentor clears his court. Justice system shaken to core. I gathered my briefcase, now returned, its contents intact, and slipped it under my arm. The leather felt heavier but cleaner, as if the weight had shifted from secrecy to vindication. Mercer escorted me to the side door, past the rows of portraits lining the wall. We stopped at the empty space reserved for his own portrait. He caught my eye and smiled faintly. "Maybe someday they'll hang yours there too," he said under his breath. "For saving the court." I smiled back but didn't answer. Some victories are best left unspoken. Outside, the courthouse steps were still wet from the morning rain but now gleamed under weak sunlight. A small crowd had gathered, phones raised, murmuring not insults but questions. The DOJ agents formed a corridor for me, shielding me from the crush. I stepped into the light, head high, silver hair catching the glow, no cuffs, no whispers of delusional, only the quiet realization rippling through the crowd that the woman they'd mocked had just toppled a conspiracy. A reporter called out, "Professor Halloran, what's next?" I paused at the bottom of the steps. "Accountability," I said simply, "and reform." Then I walked on, not waiting for the next question. That evening I returned to my quiet office, the one sanctuary untouched by scandal. The desk lamp glowed softly on the stacks of casebooks, the corkboard of old lecture notes, the framed photo of my first class at Ellsworth Law. My cat blinked at me from a windowsill, unbothered by the storm I'd unleashed. I set my briefcase down and opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay a faded folder labeled in my own hand, Ethics and Power. The same notes I'd lectured from 20 years ago, now brittle at the edges, but still legible. Next to them I placed the thank you letter Daniel Mercer had just handed me at the courthouse, a simple note on judicial stationery. "You once taught me how to wield power with care. Today you taught me again. Daniel." I sat back, eyes on the two artifacts, the lesson and the legacy, and felt a quiet circle close. Not triumph, not revenge, but continuity. The very thing I'd spent my life teaching had finally rippled outward into the world, correcting itself even as it threatened to devour me. Outside, Headlines rolled across news tickers. Massive bribery scheme uncovered in state courts. Chief judge vows reform. Credits former professor. But in my office, there was only the steady tick of a clock and the smell of old paper. For the first time in years, I let out a long breath without the weight of secrecy pressing it back. My work wasn't done. Corruption never sleeps, but something had shifted. I was no longer just a retired professor with a hidden network. I was a witness, a catalyst, a proof that even entrenched power can be forced to look itself in the mirror. I closed the drawer, leaving the folder and the letter side by side. Ethics and power. Teacher and student. Corruption and reform. The story wasn't over, but my part in this chapter was finished. I turned off the lamp, the room falling into soft darkness. Through the window, the courthouse dome glowed under spotlights, its silhouette clean against the night. Somewhere inside, Daniel Mercer was beginning the hardest work of his life, reforming the institution he'd inherited. But tonight, at least, the ledger was balanced. I picked up my coat, brushed a hand over the plaque on my wall, and smiled. After all these years, the lesson had landed. And for the first time since stepping into that car with my briefcase, I felt truly free.